What if we can positively impact society by reshaping the mindsets of young men? And while we're at it, let me ask you, what does it mean to be a man? My name is Dennis Meralda, a father, a teacher, a coach, a mentor, and a principal with over 2 decades of experience shaping the minds and characters of young men across the United States. If these questions resonate, if you're a young man looking to improve your life or a parent looking for tools to help your son become the best version of himself, the Building Men podcast was created for you. What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Building Men podcast, or welcome back if you are a long-time listener. As always, I'm your host, Dennis Meralda, joined today by my new man, Coach JV. We're going to get into that in a little bit. I was introduced to Coach JV by Mikey C. Rock, who was just on the podcast, if you're listening along with us, and had a quick conversation with him, and I'm intrigued by all the stuff he is up to right now. Recently in the podcast, I started, fanboying around people's facial hair, and I got to give you some props, dude. You got good beard game, man.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Yeah, I put a lot of work into it.
Do you do like beard oils and beard balms and beard butters? Like, what's your game there? What do you do?
I do, yeah. So
Okay.
actually, I have my own beard oil company. So I actually created my own, like just because of all the silicones. I took silicones out. I have my own beard oil brand called Refined Integrity. So yeah, I was obsessed with like when men have beards when they're not well kept. And so I started getting into men's grooming and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And but they have silicones in them. The perfume, and so I built my own beard oil. So yeah, and it has biotin because a lot of men struggle in growing their beard. So it's like I've been using biotin in it, and yeah, so something I'm very, very adamant about my beard.
Well, it was a perfect setup then for the beard oil thing. I wasn't.
We go.
Yeah, like perfect there. So, how long have you had the beard for?
I've had my beard since, man, I started going through a great awakening around 2000. I started when I left corporate America. It was almost kind of like an FU to corporate America. I started growing a beard. And then I remember I did one YouTube video, said I want to be a warrior in a modern day society. And it seemed as my internal changed, my external changed. So the way I look is the way I feel inside, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. To learn more about our programs, including one-on-one mentorship coaching, the foundation, our Building Men online group community for young men, or to bring a Building Men experience to your school, check out our website, buildingmen.io, or click the links in the bio. Now, back to the show.
So like it was almost like my old look. I was an executive wearing suits, I had a line in my hair, clean shaven, and I look stale, and that's how I felt inside. It was interesting. My outside matches exactly. I feel like a warrior inside. So it kind of evolved. And I started growing it longer, but I like to keep it trimmed up. And then I got into like beard grooming because I didn't like seeing the big scraggly beards and stuff. So
did you ever have the beard that was like way down to your chest? Like, did you ever have that beard?
No, this is the longest I've got.
All right. Okay.
This is it.
And it's a good shape. You got
Thank you.
you got the salt and pepper thing going too. Are you ever a guy that'd be like, you know what, I'm going to put a little color into it? Or are you like, I'm fully embracing the gray and the white in my beard?
Absolutely. I want this thing to turn white, man.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. Yeah. I feel like as I build and become more wise, it gets wider.
100%. And then you become more like the wizard or like Gandalf or Dumbledore.
Yeah, one of our companies, that's funny you brought that up. One of our companies is called Merlin, and we named it after the wizard because of wisdom. So
perfect, dude. It's interesting with me, like when I was younger, I could never grow a mustache, right? I could grow a beard, pretty solid, but my mustache was always struggling. So I always had like I had like an Abraham Lincoln kind of beard and a little bit of wispiness over my lip. But then once the white and the gray started coming in, I dig it now.
Yeah, it's
and
cool,
people
man.
are like, oh, are you gonna? No way I'll ever color that stuff. And it's how I feel. It's interesting too, JB, when you were talking about the corporate America, the way that you looked. As a middle school principal, I was suited up every single day. So doing the tie every day, the jacket. I was clean shaven. My hair was a certain way, and I would look in the mirror, and it didn't fit. It was like square peg, round hole. But I did that for me. It was like 15 years.
Yeah,
I lived in that. And the first thing I did when I had my transformational shift, which happened during like the COVID time frame, I started growing facial hair, and I haven't looked back since then. I keep it like around this length here, but yeah, there is something to that. Like when what you feel, the way that you look is like how you feel on the inside. So take us back to that guy in corporate America. Who was he? JV, or was it John?
Yeah, it was
He was
interesting.
John. He was that's who he was.
John
Yeah.
Vasquez. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
this guy that I call him the created I am is what the world said is success, right? I went to
Yeah.
school, got the job, got the 401k, got the degree, went to banking school, and then I was just dead, man. I was dead inside. I didn't feel like I was fulfilling a purpose. And it was like the guy, it matched the way I look. I look at pictures of myself back then. It's like the suit was like a representation of like almost being confined, right? Not being able to be myself. And then, then I keeping up with the Joneses, the 535i
Yeah.
BMW, the big house and all that stuff. So yeah, that guy back then was just, it was lost. I felt lost. I was like, this is it. This is it. I'm going to be in these executive meetings, having meetings, talk about meetings. I'm making $250,000 a year and a teller's struggling on the teller line to pay her bills because the guy's not paying child support. It never felt right to me, man. Like that guy would pull up in the suit to a branch and, one of our banks, and everybody stands at attention and cleans up the branch. I'm like, why aren't we cleaning for our customers? Everything's backwards here, man.
Right.
I'm like, shouldn't we be cleaning it for our customers? But hey, the executives are coming. And then we're acting like we give a shit about the teller that we're sitting across from. It's like, oh, hey, Julie, because we read her name tag. It's like, she's like, get the hell out of here. Let me
Right.
just feed my kid. And like, I'm kind of going deep into it. I felt fake, man. I really felt fake. And it didn't feel real to me.
You had I had a similar thing. It's what it made me think of, JV, was Jerry Maguire
Yes. Hmm.
when he's in the hospital and he's talking to the kid and he's like, your dad, he would, no one's ever going to stop him on the ice rink. It would take the Muddy Morphin Power Rangers to be able to
Yeah.
stop your dad. And the kid looks at him, he's like, fuck you,
Yes.
because he's all he wants is his dad to be healthy and alive, and his dad had another concussion or another neck injury,
Yes.
and he had this come to Jesus moment where he's like, holy shit, like, is this what I'm about? As he's there and he's on his BlackBerry or whatever and he's texting other people. So you
Yeah.
had that moment. I it resonates with me when you're like looking at yourself in the mirror, like, is this what it is this what I'm about? Is this what life is about? And there's so much more
Yeah.
to that. So do you remember the exact moment where you had this, like, all right, it was this way before and then it's another way right after this?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So it kind of goes back. I committed suicide on December 18, 2006. So it was like there was a 7 year transition, like Cinderella story, from suicide, to executive at a bank. And then I get in 2012. So actually, man, 12 years ago, 2012, I got invited to executive banking school. I became a VP. My pay went up like 75,000. It was a huge year for me. And you're supposed to feel good about that, right? You're like, oh man, I'm moving up. So I go to CBA Executive Banking School, and the moment that it all shifted for me is we would take over the campus in Greenville, South Carolina, which is called Furman University. So the executives would all fly down. Now there's executives from all over the world. It's like you got PCBS and CBA. That's what you graduate to become an elite executive in banking, right? So I'm there, and there's couple things that I noticed. Is number one is how effing miserable everybody was, man. I was like, I was probably making the
Yeah.
least amount of money there, 250,000. Some people are going to become CFOs of banks, different countries, things like that. And everybody every night, we're all away from our families, right? You would think that these people had the worst lives. They were partying so hard. And I'm like, is your life that miserable back home that you're going to be out partying every single night? I'm like, we're supposed to be here learning. So that was one thing. And then Furman University, if you've ever been there, it was so beautiful, my friend. Like the campus was built by brick, like hand by hand, and there was this gardener there that this garden's beautiful there, and he was every day tending the garden. I would talk to him. He was like the happiest guy I ever met, man. He was like he would talk to his flowers and he would water the garden, and I spent a lot of time talking to him, and I'm like almost a Mr. Miyagi moment, right? And I'm
Right.
like, okay, and so I'm sitting in class, I'm watching this shit. I'm paying it. I have severe dyslexia, so I really had to pay attention. So I would go back and study, and I would go through this process. And what's going on my computer? go through this process, and I said something's wrong here, and I started to get this feeling in my gut that something was wrong. And it's a liberal arts college, which we were executives using their college, but it's called a liberal arts college. So it was religious studies. So they had this Buddhist temple that you could walk up to. You couldn't get inside of it, but I remember sitting on the edge looking over Greenville, South Carolina, and I got this feeling in my stomach, and it said, "You got to leave banking, man." And I was like, "Whoa!" Or a voice in my head. I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "This is a Cinderella story, man. I was a drug addict 7 years ago, committed suicide, horrible father." And I have all the stuff, the 535i BMW, the house, the salary. We're wearing the suits, and I'm like, who's this? And it was like, you have to leave. And the next 2012 to 2007 was the toughest time in my life because I felt like I was living a lie. And that's where it started, the awakening. So here I am graduating school and, moving up the ranks to be a VP. And I'm like, and I could have just settled there, but I didn't. It just something told me that I had to do something different. And I'm not saying that bankers are bad. I'm just saying for me, something. So I had to really look at what was I truly. So in banking, we're supposed to teach financial education, but I was asking myself, why are my customers so broke? Why is everybody struggling? Why? And I kept saying that stuff, and I'm like, why is the teller on the teller line barely making it, and we're coming in with our something just felt out of balance, and I was getting sick, like physically sick in my stomach, and that's where it all started for me. And I was like, I have to do something different.
I want to go back to your Miyagi guy. All
Mhm.
right, to the gardener, and he was there speaking to you. If he was on the other side of the campus during that time, who knows if you would have had the same, spiritual awakening.
Mhm. Mhm.
So he was there when he needed to be there. And I think about Mr. Miyagi, and it was like wax on, wax off, paint
Yeah,
the
yes.
fence, on the floor. If you were to talk about, the this gardener, he's singing to the flowers, was there some specific thing that you remember in the conversation with him, some a piece of advice that he gave, something that you were like, you know what, I'm going to think about this in a little bit of a deeper level that could have
Yes.
sparked this
Mhm.
this new you that transformed?
Yeah, I was just asking him, I that's where I got the history from. He
Yeah.
told me he knew the history of the whole school, and he was like, and this flower does this, and this flower does this. And I'm like, man, you seem so happy. He goes, this is what he said to me, and this is what I say now. He goes, I have everything I need. Therefore, I get everything I want. And I'm like, interesting. I said, well,
Mm.
then I would just talk to him every once in a while. And, he had a beautiful little family. He just loved what he did. And I was like, there's something here. I'm sitting here making, going to be making $250,000 a year. We're all stressed out beyond our wildest dreams. Everybody's partying like rock stars. I'm like, and this dude's tending a garden and he has everything he needs. I'm like, what am I seeking, man? Like, what is this that I'm seeking? Because the world told me that I have to go to school, get a job, get a 401k, keep moving up the ranks, get to regional president, do all this stuff because that's what my edification from the males within my life, that's what it looks like. Well, what's next? What are you doing next? When I was a bodybuilder, what's the next show? What are you doing? It's like there was this invisible line that kept getting drawn in the sand that I couldn't seem to obtain. But he had no line in the sand. It was all everything and nothing. And he was like, I'm happy, man. I garden every day. Like
Yeah.
he's like, look at this garden. And I'm like, yeah, it's freaking beautiful, man. And so that was like, he just said, he's like, and it just stuck with me. He's like, I have everything I need.
It's interesting. I'm gonna butcher the story a little bit, but it reminds me of there's a tale about a guy who's on a beach and he's fishing,
Mm.
and he's reeling in all these
Oh,
fish, and the guy
yes.
comes up to me, he's like, dude, he's like, you're onto something here, like, why don't we get you a boat and we'll go out and we'll catch even more fish? And he's like, well, why? He's like, well, you catch more fish and we could buy another boat and you could, start building an empire. And he's like, but why?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, 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 but then we're going to start a business and we're going to make millions of dollars and you can
Yep.
retire. And what do you want to do when you retire? He's like, I want to stand on the beach and I want to catch fish. Right. And
Mhm.
he's like, that's already
Yep.
what he's doing.
Yep.
It's like going through this whole
Yes.
challenge. I know I butchered that, but that's the
No,
the
yeah.
the idea around that story, JV. But so you also have a moment that you speak about, and you talked about suicide a couple different times. So I believe if I have it right, it was December 18th of '06.
Yeah. Yep.
That was the moment. So before we get to that, let's use that as like a signpost in the story. So
Yep.
build us up to that point. Like, who were you? A lot of the audience that I'm speaking to or
Yeah.
we're talking to right now are young men and their parents, right, in that age range, right? So talk to
Mhm.
us a little bit about who you were as a young man, like middle school, high
Mhm.
school age range, up and bring us up to the point where
Yeah.
that decision crossed your mind.
Yeah, so it started when I was really young, man. I really have a lot of trouble remembering kindergarten to sixth grade. I had some stuff happen to me as a child that shouldn't happen to a child. It's like and I'm pretty open about it, just things that shouldn't happen to a
Yeah.
child, right? So during those moments, I now am remembering more as an adult now that I'm tapping into healing the broken little boy the last 3 years. I'm 48 years old now, so it's been a long journey, but I'm starting to re-remember the moments that I blocked out from kindergarten to sixth grade. And so the little boy I was a chunky little boy. I kind of never really fit into any friend groups. I mean, I wasn't picked on, but it was like I was picked on for my way, but I was able to pretty resilient. But the things that I was going through really tapped me into my imagination, like really tapped me into my imagination, and like really trying to put myself in another frame of mind because of things I was going through. Well, I went into high school, I made an attempt at bodybuilding. I remember the first time I ever ever did weight training. I was like, I was not a good athlete, so I, wasn't accepted in the athletics. I was doing it, but I was never played, never started.
Right.
And then I remember the first time, man, I laid on a bench in ninth grade. I saw Flex magazine on the cover of a Flex magazine, and I laid on the bench, and I was like, oh, I want to do this. And I remember picking up the bar and bringing it down. I was by myself, and I pushed back up, and I kind of got stuck halfway, and I was like, and I pushed through, and I got it, and I'm like, I finally found something that I'm in control of. For the first time in my life, I ever felt in control by lifting the weights. So I got obsessed with bodybuilding. I was lifting weights. The weird thing was my body wasn't changing like that. I don't know if you remember a long time ago, there was Cybergenics. It was the first supplement
Yeah.
program. I did Cybergenics and I did the whole transformation. The only thing that looked different is I didn't have any body hair and I was tanner. My body didn't look any different. So I was pissed. And so, but I found some solitude, or I found some empowerment in the fact that what I did, the results that I created through the actions I was taking, would give me external validation. So I went in the military, went out of high school, went in the military, went in the Coast Guard, and then I came out and in the Coast Guard, I was in California, I discovered bodybuilding, like deep bodybuilding. So I went deep into it, man, but it was a slippery slope, man, because I thought that if I won a bodybuilding show, the first bodybuilding show I did, it was like, I remember getting on stage. I had trained, I was a chubby kid my whole life, and first time I ever had abs, man. I get on stage, I invited my whole family, and I'll never forget the feeling of walking up in front of 300 people and they were just staring at me. And I'm like, I'm
Right.
famous, man. Like people are looking at me, and I probably shouldn't have done this show. I didn't look good enough, but I was like, I did it, and I ended up getting third out of three. Like, so I got a trophy. I was super excited. My friend, I had never been edified for anything. And I was like, oh, I got that trophy and it felt so fucking good, man. And I went on this insatiable appetite to become a bodybuilder, man. And unfortunately, the environment that I was going into, and it's kind of heading there pretty heavy right now with the bodybuilding environment. Everybody's jumping on steroids, and it's like everybody's like nobody's putting in the work anymore. It's like jumping. So I met this group of bodybuilders in California, and I started getting on steroids. I just wanted to be a pro bodybuilder. I wanted to be famous so bad because I wanted edification. I wanted people to see me. I wanted to be that athlete. I wanted people to, I just wanted people to see me. That's what it was. And it was, I didn't realize at that time, because I didn't have, the wisdom that I have now, is that it was just the broken little boy screaming for attention. That's all it was. So I ended up taking steroids. I gained like 20 pounds in the first like 6 months. And then I finally started placing in shows and doing really well. And I got addicted to the attention, man. I mean, unbelievably addicted. And then I was a clean cut guy. I'd go out and drink with my buddies, nothing big. I was really focused on bodybuilding. When I was training, no pizza, no alcohol, no nothing. Like not even, intimacy. I was like focused. Like, I really wanted to be a top bodybuilder. And my manifestation was to be a top bodybuilder. And I started building a bodybuilding company while I had a leg injury. And the doctor gave me Vicodin. And I was like, man, I want to train for the show. I want to continue on. So he gave me about, for the injury, some
Yeah.
painkillers. And back then it was like they would give it to you like it was water. And so I remember taking the pill, and I was driving down the freeway, and I remember the underpass I was under, and all of a sudden I got this euphoric feeling in my body, and I was like, whoa. And I remember walking into Walmart, and I was able to communicate with people. I was loose. I was like, oh, I was flowing. I was like, man, this is a different vibe for me. Like usually I was kind of, I had a charismatic person, but I could just talk to people and I felt really good. So the next day I took it, not for the injury, but for the feeling. And like many clean cut people becoming opiate addicts, one pill became two, two became three. Then I started taking it, 7 times a day, and then 20 pills a day. Then I had to
Wow.
go to the black market and back then, 2004 to 2006. I mean, it was the opiate pandemic, or what do you call it? Epidemic was happening, right? I mean, doctors were just prescribing it. You can get it from Canada. Then I was taking like 30 pills a day, and then try not to get emotional talking about this. My daughter was born during this time, and so around 2006 is when it would just start spiraling, completely spiraling. I mean, I was running a bodybuilding company. I was a functional addict. And then I switched to a drug called Nubane. It was an injectable painkiller because I wasn't getting high anymore. And so you just kind of seek more and more. And it went from clean cut dude to having a 3-year-old daughter to full blown opiate addict. And from July 2006 to December, I ran through $60,000. I mean, every day I was just buying drugs. I forgot I had a business. I forgot my daughter was being dragged into crack houses. I mean, you just it's wild to think, if you've never been in that environment, how when your energy changes, how you can find these realms, right? I didn't know any of this existed, man. You know, I was a cop in the military. Like we stopped drug dealers. Now here
Yeah.
I am in crack houses looking for opiates, and it was a slippery slope. And on December 18th, 2006, I'd gone to Walmart to buy my daughter some Christmas presents, to kind of go do some Christmas shopping. And I was just high out of my mind. And I had this whole cart full of Christmas presents. And I ran my debit card and it declined. Mind you, I had like 60 grand in my account in July. I wasn't even paying attention to my bank, nothing. Ran the business credit card, ran it, and it's like, sir, it's declined, declined, declined. I'm like, what? Like I've always done well with money. I've always had money. I'm like, what is going on? I was so high. I go to the bank. I remember sitting across from the banker, which is ironic. I became a banker, and the banker turns a screen towards me. I'd never seen an overdrafted account, and it was just red. And he's like, "You're overdrafted, man." I'm like, and then he goes, "Well, so what about my credit cards? Maxed. Everything, all my business accounts are drained." And I'm like, and my ears started ringing, real like, and I'm like, "Oh my god!" And I'm starting to panic. And the manager comes over. He puts his hand on the guy's shoulder, and I just heard him say, "You're broke." And I was like, and I'm just gonna go deep in the story. And then this
Yeah,
this
dude.
voice this voice started talking to me. It's like, "You're worthless," and it was the same voice that would talk to me when I was a little kid
Yeah.
when that stuff was happening to me. And I'm like, he was back. He was back. It was like, it's new level, same devil, right? He was like, "You're worthless. You're not worth anything. You're a piece of shit." And I just kept hearing the voice. If anybody's been this deep into it, like we're before suicide, it was just like, I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel worthless. And I'd never really, and this is an important part of the story, I'd never really experienced God. I was baptized Catholic, but we went to church during Easter and Christmas, and I never was taught about Jesus or prayer or God. And ironically, the craziest thing is, I went into my office and I loaded up a bunch of opiates into a syringe, and for some reason I knelt down and I prayed, man. I prayed to God, whoever this God was. I'd never prayed before in my life. I said, "Dear," I'm going to paraphrase it, "Dear God, I'm so sorry for what I did. I didn't want it to be this way. Please forgive me. I didn't want my daughter to go through this or my mom." But I was like, I don't want them to find me, laying there. So when I remember when I took the last shot, I put as much as I could into my vein, and I started to black out, and I just threw it. So I remember thinking, I blew up a mattress, and I was like, if I lay on the mattress, at least they'll find me, laying on a mattress, not laying face down. And I blacked out. And then I get all of a sudden I hear a phone ringing. Right? It wasn't all of a sudden, it was 48 hours later. And that book across my shoulder over here, The Secret, my mom, who was my best friend, and this point, if you see an opiate addict, I was stealing from them. I mean, I was a horrible human being, man. Horrible human being. So anybody who's listening to this, I really empathize with you if someone's going through an addiction. You're just in a very dark place. It's a very demonic place to be. That's why the synthetics in it, it's just designed to pull you to the darkest place you've ever been. So phone, if you remember the Razor flip phones, it said, "Mom" across the front of it. And I flipped it open, and I'm like, I'm still high as hell. And the first thought I had, which was crazy, was, you can't even kill yourself, right? That's how dark
Wow.
my energy was. So I pick up the phone, and my mom's beautiful voice, she's like, my mom's a very, very classy lady. And she goes, she doesn't cuss. But this time she goes, "I don't know what the fuck's going on with you." She woke me up she didn't even know she woke me up from a suicide. And she said, "You need to read a book called The Secret. Your grandma just read it, and you have to read it." And so I went and got The Secret at Barnes and Nobles. I was still high out of my mind. I didn't even know. I'm like, am I dead? Am I alive? I mean, I took a massive amount of opiates. And I get the book The Secret, and I put the CD in, and I was like, holy shit, I created all of this. I'm like, I created all of this. There's things that happened to me, but it was the adoption and the belief system that was created in me that manifested outside of me. And so I was like, well, I'm alive. I'm like, holy shit. And then that's when the journey started. So I started with I am affirmations, man. That's how it started. And 17 years later, here we are, man. And so it's
Wow.
like, yeah. And I don't know. I do know, I take that back. I believe that I prayed to God in that moment because God is real. To me, God is real. Like, I'm like, God, why would who am I talking to? Like, I'd never been who was I talking to? And then that moment where I came for salvation or forgiveness or whatever it was, um it woke me back up, and it was like, okay, you get it. Like, you can't do this yourself, JV. And so that's when I became JV. And so from that point on, so
Wow, dude. Well, thank you for going that deep, man. That's some heavy stuff right there. I felt it. And I mean, especially when we talk about our kids, right? I mean, that's where it really really starts to get to us when people ask me about my backstory and I get into it. I can get through it until I get to a couple moments, especially with my daughters,
Yeah.
That just hits me. It gets me right in that spot where
Yeah.
it got you
Yeah.
right there, man. That's some heavy stuff. I really appreciate it. So, I mean, there's so many different places we can go from that story, JV. I mean, so when you woke up, like when mom calls, right? And I still remember
Mm.
those flip phones too.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty funny. Even just thinking about that was the world back then with flip phones. So
Mm.
when your mom called you to go to get the secret, right? And so that's you just decide, okay, I'm going to get up. Was there a moment you thought, all right, you weren't successful at this, you got to try again, or was that like enough of a pattern interrupt? Like, I'm gonna go read this book and just see what happens here. What was your thought
Yeah.
process there?
Oh, dude, it was a vortex, man. It wasn't even like it was divine. It wasn't even the thought shut off and it was a singular mission to get this thing. It was just like I went in there. I
Okay.
remember I got in, I had an H2 Hummer, man. It was like I had this big H2 Hummer and it's Team Vasquez bodybuilding on it. And I'm driving. And I remember thinking, I'm really high. I shouldn't be driving. I got in the car and it wasn't that far from the facility. And I walk in there and I'm like frantically, I walk up to and it was blowing up. The Secret was blowing up back then. They couldn't even
Yeah.
keep it on the shelves. And I went up, I'm like, I need to get a book called The Secret. To the guy's like, whoa, relax, dude. You all
Yeah.
right? I'm like, I need to get The Secret. He's like, we got a couple copies left. And I got it. And I just went back and there was no stopping. It was just like it was just a fluid thought process all the way to watching it. And I literally was like, I would love to meet Rhonda Bryan someday because I'm like, it saved my life, man. It really did save my life. And what I realized it's a very, very it's kind of like the Bible for dummies. It like breaks down the consciousness level of God and like what is creation. And I was like, wow. And then I just started, I had a safe in my office, man. I had cocaine in there, I had drugs in there, I had opiates in there, and I just started dumping everything. I started dumping everything. I called, I can't even remember the exact timeline of how everything was so convoluted. I was like, listen, I'm messed up. I need help. We shut the business down. And then it just, all I could do was focus on my thoughts, and that was it. So I just made it my mission. First of all, I forgave myself. I was like, I had to forgive myself because I had to create a new foundation. I was like, the only way I can do this is to create a new foundation. I was like, you got to be, no pun intended, born again. I was like, you have to kind of rebirth yourself. So I was like, listen, I'm going to forgive in my mind the things that happened to me as a child, not for the other person, but for me. And then I'm going to forgive myself for being a shitty father for those 3 years. And I'm going to come back into presence. And the beautiful thing is maybe I had an advantage. Everything was stripped from me, man. They took away my money. It took away my cars. I was getting evicted from my apartment. I have wonderful parents, so I thank them. If it wasn't for them, I would have been homeless. So I'm not going to pretend like I was homeless, but I was very damn close, more ego homeless. And I started from a new foundation of thoughts become things, and I just started building from there. And I started building, and it's been a journey, man. It was these huge waves of energy for probably the first 12 to 14 years. And the last 3 years, it's been more blips of energy. Like, so it's like, I'm really way up and in the secret and doing well. And then I found, I went into, actually, I'm such an extremist. I went into Buddhism. I'm like, okay, went from drug addict to Buddhism. And
Right. Right.
and the greatest lesson in that, my friend, was like they weren't giving me what I needed. And guess what? That was the answer. I was like, they weren't giving me what I need. I was like, I need the answer. There was no answer. And so I left Buddhism and then I met, Christ and had my own journey with Christ. So that is my biggest part of my story now. So
Wow. Was when you started reading The Secret, you threw out the drugs. Was it cold turkey 100%? Was there relapse? Did you go through withdrawals? What was that like for you?
yeah, great question. It was cold turkey. I had and I won't mention names, but I had a person that was very close to me that had a husband that was a doctor and very, very kind, and he was able to get me some like the Ultram to start to come off it. So I went through a 2 week detox process myself, and probably I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. Get professional help. You can die doing that type of stuff. I literally shut it off. And I puked for the first week, constantly throwing up. And the only thing got me through it was The Secret, man. I kept watching it. I kept watching it. I'm like, I got to reframe my thoughts. And then the moment, man, it was 2 weeks into it. I locked myself in my apartment, and I remember walking outside. I drank some water, and it's kind of funny. I was walking, and I saw for the first time ever in my life, I was like, "That's a pretty flower," and I'm like, did I just say that's a pretty flower? I was like, what the? And I'm like, did you just? I've never noticed a flower. I mean,
Yeah.
everything's like, and I'm like, wow. And I just kind of walked. And there's a place called Val Vista Lakes where I used to live, and I just sat there on the grass. I'm looking at these lake houses. I'm like, I can do this. Like, I can do this. Now, again, I say maybe I had an advantage because I had nothing left, man, other than to believe in something, right? And so that's how it started. And I rehabbed, and I haven't relapsed. I never relapsed. Um, I have relapsed in going back into that level of low consciousness, to be honest with you, like into the broken little boy. And that's been my journey for the last 3 years, is to heal. I'm 48 now, trying. I think in all of us, all men are working to heal that broken little boy. You know, it's often from the lack of edification from our fathers, and I don't blame my father for any of this. My father's a great man. It's just, he did what he could. He
Yeah.
worked. It was always me wanting to be loved by my father.
Yeah. So I'm going through the same thing still. I'm
Yeah.
47 and I'm still dealing with the same exact thing. So in your story, JV, you had a couple of pause points. One was this getting over the addiction to all this stuff, right? And then you get into, all right, I'm going to school, read The Secret, find the flower, you find that whole idea,
Mhm.
like, okay, I
Yeah.
could appreciate things. Clean cut, suit wearing guy. And then the next 5 or 6 years, you're in this like rat race to prove yourself by making more money and,
Yeah.
getting the promotion and the car and all these things. So then after you had that other moment where you were like, you know what, we're on this trip and I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to
Mhm.
like follow this. I need to be
Yeah.
myself. I need to grow the beard and like really
Yeah.
find that inner warrior. What was the first thing in that direction? So now once you started in that
Yeah.
second rebirth, so to
Yeah.
speak, what was the next thing that you started to do? Like, was it like, all right, I'm quitting my job, I'm doing this,
Yeah.
or was it like a slow progression? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. So 2012 was I left in 2017. So that was that awakening in banking
Yeah.
school. Like it was like, because all I did is I traded one addiction for another. It was like, now I'm the cars and the house. And look at me, dad. Look at, now I got a
Yep.
535 by BMW. Look at my house. And I remember every time, and again, please know I'm not blaming my dad. It's not my dad's fault, right? So it's like, but I'm saying, like, I remember when I bought my house, oh, what would my dad think? What would this man, what would my brother think? And so I realized that there's a big problem with that, because it was never good enough. And I was back in the same addiction. So from 2012 to 2017, I had that awakening at banking school, and I'm going through banking school. I kept going back there every year, right? And I never got to see the gardener after that first year, which was kind of bummed. But I started to go through this awakening, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore, man. I'm like, I cannot live this fake life, and I have to figure out what this intuitive. Now, my body was responding unfavorably too. I exercise. I was doing fasting. I always say you become spiritual when you watch Joe Rogan. So I watched Joe Rogan, and
Yeah.
I started to see a lot of spiritual stuff, and I started to tap into that. And, your reticular activating system starts to pick stuff up. And so then I started to learn, I started hearing about plant medicines. I started hearing about all this stuff and Christ consciousness. And I just started going down that path. And, I was married. And then what's wild is my son was born on December 18th, 2006. He was born on the
Wow.
day I committed suicide, which is crazy. Like this, he came out of nowhere. Like we weren't planning on having kids, and we're divorced now. We have a great relationship, but his name's John Joe. We named him after me. He's literally a carbon copy of me. So I believe that he came on the day I committed suicide. Is the rebirth of me. It's for me to heal that in myself so I can pass it on to the next generation. So that was a big driver for me. So now my daughter's becoming a teenager. Um, I'm working 19 hours a day. I get home and my boss is calling me. It's like, it was a nightmare, man. And so I'm like, there was a moment where I wrote a book called The You Must Believe Way of Life. And I started to write a story of my, it would be autobiography, bio, whatever, the story of my life. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to tell my parents what happened. They didn't even know I committed suicide. I never told them. I never told anybody that I committed suicide. And I wanted to write the book to tell the story about my addiction. They knew. My mom's like, I knew you were a drug addict. She's like, it was just hard to accept. Right. It was like you were just destroying everybody. So it was 2017. Our bank was going through a big scandal too, and that was one of the things I was like, I can't be part of this shit. Like, this is like, it was super unethical what the banks are doing. They're like, what they not. I'm saying all bankers are, but it was just like, I was like, this doesn't work for me. So I just made this decision. I was like, I'm leaving, man, and I'm gonna go. This is what I thought. I'm gonna go be a famous book author and podcast host. And I approached who's my CFO now of our companies, and I was like, hey, he was one of my bankers, and I said, do you know how to do podcasts? And he said, he lied to me. He said, yes. And so we started a podcast, and I left, brother. And I had quite a bit of money in my bank account, a 401k. And that's where the spiritual journey started, because I asked God, and I think I have the YouTube video in 2018. I asked him to be a warrior in a modern day society. And he stripped everything for me twice, man, in the process. And so you got to be careful what you ask for from God. Like, I asked to be a warrior. He said, you haven't been battle tested yet, man. You think that suicide was self-induced. I'm gonna take you through. I'm gonna see how spiritual you are and how bad you want this. So I left in 2017, launched my first coaching program in 2018. Nobody signed up. Launched it again halfway through the year. Nobody signed up. We got an investor, we got the 3T Warrior Academy facility, and then nobody was signing up, right? And I'm like, oh my God, 401ks draining, getting divorced, going through this whole process. We finally get it going in 2019. Remember, I asked to be a warrior, I
Right.
asked to be battle tested. 2019, boom, we go through Alex Hormozzi's coaching program. We end up making a 6-figure facility. We're exploding, and then the pandemic hits, and I'm getting divorced. They take everything from me. I end up back on my parents' couch in 2020, man.
Wow.
So guess what my pops is doing? He's looking at me going, "I told you so. You should have stayed in banking. You should have. You disrupted your family. Now you're back on our couch." And so that's when the warrior was developed, because I'm sitting there being judged by external forces, knowing that I have to continue to reframe the mind inside. No matter what was happening in external forces, I had to believe that God was guiding me. I could have gone back. I have an executive banking degree, a 4-year degree. I could have gone back and got a 6-figure salary right away. And like, why aren't you doing that? I said, because my path is much bigger than money. It's much bigger than its purpose. And I humbled myself, lived on my parents' couch, and I was like, and yeah, that's when it exploded for us. My daughter who has been through this whole process with me, she got us on TikTok, and we exploded.
Uh,
We absolutely exploded. And I took people on the journey from broke on the couch to where we are now, which is not broke on the couch anymore. But yeah, I know that was kind of a lot to unpack, but
no,
it
dude,
was,
it's
yeah.
that's there's so much there that I resonate with too, JV. And it's in 2020, myself, 3 kids. My oldest is will be 19 when this episode drops. Middle of a divorce during COVID. There was a point when I was sleeping on my parents' couch.
Wow. My
And
daughter's gonna turn 20 this next month. This is
dude, it's
crazy, man. Holy
yep.
cow.
So it was in November of 2020. I was,
Yeah.
for about a month with my kids going back and forth to their mom's house when they were with me, when they were with at my parents' house. I'm on the couch. Yeah, dude, same same idea. And then I was like living in my sister had this little tiny beach house in the Jersey Shore. So it was December, January time frame. It was like a 2-bedroom place. And so the kids are doing virtual school. I would pick them up from
Mm.
their moms, and they would be with me for the week, and they would, we were sharing the space was tiny, tiny, but it
Yeah.
was that like I had the same moment too, where I had to kind of crawl back to my dad, and there's a lot of father
Mm.
issues with me. People that listen to the podcast know there's a lot there, but it
Okay.
was like I felt like I had to put my tail between my legs and go
Mhm.
back and say I need help right now. And I also at the moment like I should just go back to being a principal. I should try to get back
Mm.
and be a principal. That's like it's a safe thing. I get paid every 2 weeks. I know what
Yeah.
to expect. But there was that little thing inside of me too. It was like, no, like this is the battle that's in front of you right now. Your kids are watching, and
Mhm.
that's when I get emotional about this story. It's like I
Yeah.
know, like my whole thing was my kids were they were. I try to be a lighthouse for them, right? I
Yes.
try to like be the one to God, but at the point they were that lighthouse for me as well during that time. Powerful stuff, man. I appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah.
Um, so
100%. With the yeah, I want to bring up like the kids
yeah,
there. That somebody asked me, there's two driving forces. The first one was when I woke up from my sleep, I'm like, What are you doing, dude? Like, you have a 3-year-old daughter. What when I started thinking about, oh my God, what if it would have happened? And then my son came along, right? Now I got a 8-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter that are watching my every move. And it's been pretty powerful for the men out there listening to this. My daughter got interviewed, and it never came out. They were gonna do some documentary thing, but it was kind of neat. I got to hear her, broke my heart. I got to hear her being interviewed about me as an executive, me now. She was like, my dad, we quarter million, we are going on all these vacations. My dad was miserable. I never saw my dad. She's like, now she calls me the richest, poorest man in the world.
uh,
Every day I leave it. I run my own ecosystems now. I leave it too. I have dinner with my daughter and my son every single night. It's like a lot of people think that we're giving our kids things that's not what they want. They just want time with us, man.
yep,
And they see us as superheroes, man. My daughter, that's crying again, man. My daughter said that when I was a drug addict, when I was a little kid, I didn't know he was a drug addict. I thought he was a superhero, man. And she goes, now he's back to that superhero. And I was like, I was listening to this, like, wow. And so it's so important, specifically men out there, like how having daughters, like I court my daughter every month. I take her on a date. I take her on a date. I take her to dinner. I show her how a man should treat her. I open her door. I do all these things. Like they are literally going to, like I always say to men, how you treat women in your life is how they'll expect a man to treat your daughter. And Yeah, the kid thing is interesting, man. It's like, and then now my son is this little, he doesn't know lack, man. He didn't get to grow up like Raven did. He's like, he's got to experience me in this level of awakening and consciousness. And my whole goal is just to let them know they're loved, man. Like I have such a beautiful relationship with my son and daughter. Like I kiss them on the face and I tell them I love them, and then I beat the shit out of them. We have fun and we kick each other's ass. And it's like, my dad was doing the best he could with the resources he had, man. His
Yeah.
pops rough on him, dude. So guess what? He's rough on me. And I think it's important too for men to hear this because who I am today, my dad doesn't even know what I do for a living. I run three seven-figure ecosystems. We have 8,000 warriors worldwide, 20 to 27 team members, 8 different countries. He has no idea what I do for a living. But when I was a banker, oh, I'm proud of my son. He's a banker. People ask him, when they ask him what I do for a living, you know what he says? He goes, I have no fucking clue. Crazy, right? So my message to men out there is stop looking at edification from your father. Like
Yes.
we and if you're a man with kids, don't make your kids think they have to be edified by you. Build that in them. That's where it comes in divine masculinity. That's what I've been teaching men. It's like I want my son to know he doesn't need my damn edification, man. He doesn't need me to tell him who he is. My son knows who he is. He's a king. He's a prince now. He's turned into a king. He's a little I'm sorry, I'm getting too into this. It's just important because men
Yeah.
like with the men that I coach, men all over the world, and like it always boils down. I'll ask why question over and over. It always boils down to the relationship with the father every single time. Every single time, it's like, hey, I said broken relationship with your father. Yes, I'm like, all right, we need to heal this so that our kids don't experience that. It's so important, especially
Amen.
with where we're at in society right now. You know.
There's so much here as well, JV, with me being a principal and my dad. When I was a principal, that was something he was proud of. My son is a principal. My son is a principal, and now he has no idea what I'm doing either. He has no like he's doing something helping young men. I don't know what. I have no idea what the hell he's doing. But that's a powerful thing, especially when you're using your kid instead of trying to do something to live up to what you think your father thinks you should be the man that your children believe is the superhero. Like
Mm.
that's what you should be. That's how we should be acting. And one thing that we talked about right before we started to record was about the idea of divine masculinity. And
Mm.
masculinity is such a tricky thing, right? I mean, it's under fire, and in the year that we are in right now.
Mm.
A lot of the young men that I work with, JV, they're like they feel like they have to apologize because they were born with a
Mm.
penis.
Yeah.
It's like they feel like
Mm.
they should
Yep.
have to tell everyone, I'm so sorry that I'm
Yep.
born, especially if they're white. Forget about it. Like, I'm so
Mm.
sorry that I was born white with a penis. Like
Mm.
that's
Mm.
how they
Mm.
feel right
Yeah.
now. And I'm also like, why don't we honor what how who we are as men and masculinity? So
Yep.
when you talk
Mm.
to me about that term divine masculinity, what does that mean to you? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really important. It's from an energetic. Well, let's take out like the actual context of a female and a male. There's in the world, there's divine feminine, divine masculine. The sun, right? The sun gives a seed to the earth, Gaia, the mother, right? There's a balance happening that's all within us. And I'll go from spiritual and then I'll back into being a man and a woman, right? So it's like the sun gives the nurturing to the earth. The earth, allows life to come into the thing. The two become one. It's all biblical, right? And so like divine masculine means that you should never, first of all, you should never spread your seed unless you are able to take care of life. Number one, right? What does that mean? It means becoming disciplined. That's what a disciple means. Being disciplined with your health, your finances, right? Your mindset, all these different things. We shouldn't be spreading our seed as a man, like in what they're teaching out here on social media is like, oh, what's your body count? How many women have you been with? Men, that is the worst. Young
Yep.
men, that is the worst thing you can do. You are not only transferring your DNA into these women, your trauma into these women, but you vice versa. You're transferring that DNA and trauma into you. So it's important for men. And what I'm teaching, I'll just speak from my own paradigm. What I'm teaching my son is you will never spread your seed until you're able to take care of yourself. So men should always be able to take care of themselves physically, mentally, spiritually. And it's not about having big muscles and kicking someone's ass or being a UFC fighter. It's having the ability to protect your family. What if you're walking down the street and somebody attacks your daughter? Are you able to physically help and obey that person coming? Like it's more of a strength within you, right? It's also understanding too that right now in society, this is like men are under attack right now. absolutely under attack. I study history to predict the future, right? The Roman days are happening right now in America. We are so demasculized, right? They're, it's our food, it's our lust, it's with the Coliseum, man. Everybody's worried about Taylor Swift in the Super Bowl. I'm like, what are you focused on right now, man? Do you realize that is the biggest trick played in the book is a Trojan horse comes in? And so what I tell men, I'm like, stop focusing on this invisible enemy, man. The enemy is you, right? So number one, you have to develop principles. Like, so for me in my business, integrity, honesty, and uncompromising belief in God. I only ecosystems I build and do business with people if I can speak about God and Jesus Christ. That's important to me. So all my decisions are driven off that. Then my family, it's peace, freedom, and family structure. If anything disrupts my peace, freedom, or family structure, it's a hard no. I don't care if you offer me 10 million, 30 million, 100 million. If it disrupts my peace, freedom, or family structure, I don't do it. That's masculinity. It's standing for something. Because if you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for everything, right? So you develop your principles first. I believe in God. I follow the life of Jesus. So that's my principle and foundation within my family. From there, also being unconditional loving as well. There's nothing wrong with being loving as a man. I tell every man in my life, I love you, brother. I love you, brother. That our dads were hard as nails, man. They thought that masculinity was not loving your son or you couldn't be loving. So a true divine masculine man is very loving. They're very empathetic. They're very compassionate, right? But at any point they can activate to protect their family. Also, a divine masculine man can take care of his household. I think it's very important. And that's your own temple. So those are some of the things that I really talk to men about. And it's so critical right now in 2024. There's a massive transitioning happening right now that most men aren't paying attention to. And I always tell people, we don't have a money problem. We do have a money problem. I can get into macroeconomics if we want to, but we have a principle problem in America, right? We're in the freest country in the world and we're some of the sloppiest men in the
Yeah,
world.
100%. Uh,
Yeah.
you look at, I've seen a lot of things recently where you look at like what the like beaches in the United States looked like in the 70s versus now,
Wow.
or like the physical fitness level of children in the 60s and 70s versus now. I mean, I've done episodes upon episodes just around the importance of getting outside, getting just
Mhm.
go and or even just be bored, just go and just
Yes.
think about things instead of the constant distraction and overload there. One thing that you mentioned, I love that the enemy is you. That's a powerful quote. I want to dive a little bit deeper into the financial literacy piece. It's
Yeah.
one thing as I go into schools, there's a couple things that come up with the boys that they want to talk about. I mean, there's a lot around feeling the ability to talk about the things that are going on in their life in a
Yeah.
safe way. They feel like they have to put on a mask, a facade to where they have to look a certain way, and I think that that's what men have done for many many years. It
Yep.
was a sign of weakness to share your shit out there. And I think what I try to do is set up a space where they're comfortable talking about those things.
Yeah.
When I ask the boys, okay, if there's something that you want to investigate a little bit further the next time I'm back or in a couple months, they want to learn about how do they really learn about what they can do with their money.
Mm.
They're because a lot of the kids they're like, oh, I just got my the WTs back or the tax return whatever information back, and they're like, I made this amount of money and I have $7.
Hmm.
And I'm like, how many times did you go to Wawa?
Yeah. Yeah.
Eight
Yeah.
times this past week. How much
Yeah.
money to spend in Wawa? $15 every time. Like, let's start
Yeah.
to connect the dots there. So if there were a couple things or strategies that you can give
Yeah.
to a young man who just started to make a little bit of money, and if he knew a couple of these things, it would help set him up for success. What would those things be, JV?
Great question. So in America right now, it used to be called the American dream. It's the American trap. So first of all, we'll talk about what is money, right? That's where I start with people. What is money?
Yeah.
Money in America is just debt. It's a fiat currency, right? We're 120% debt to income ratio in America. So it's really important to understand that. So we have more debt. Our federal government has more debt than it has money in the system. So my income is your debt. So if there's no debt, nobody borrowing, there's no income in the system. So we have to first understand that the money is just debt. Okay. So when you're growing up and you're starting to get money, right? We are taught to trade time for money, right? What happens if you only have an ecosystem where you trade time for money? So what do I need more of to make more money?
More time.
More time, right? So what are you going to do? Work 24 hours a day. So if you don't understand what money is, which is debt, and number two, that if you don't trade more time, you're not going to make more money, then you'll always be stuck in this indoctrination trap. So what first we have to understand, like, what is debt, right? So young men, do not go out and buy a brand new car when you get a job. Go out and buy a hoopty, like buy a piece of crap car, right? when you start to make a little bit of money, you should always invest in yourself first. Always. Don't go put it into a car payment. Put it into yourself and invest in yourself. Now, what does that look like? It could be setting up a savings account, learning about the capital markets. It could be crypto, stock market, but educating yourself on what money truly is, right? So money needs to always be moving. It's just currency. It has to move through the system. So number one, you should always keep your expenses. I mean, it's pretty simple stuff, right? But keep your expenses more than your output. From there, the excess you should always be putting in some sort of investment that's going to allow you to gain more money. The key to this is what I teach people is when you gain more profits and more money, you do not want to buy things. You want to buy assets that will pay for your liabilities. I'll explain that. So if you want to drive a Lambo, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. It should always be paid for by an asset. Okay, that's what I work to switch people's brain on that. So we have to rewire the foundation to understand what money is. Money is just debt. That's all it is. Every time you get paid, it's debt. And what we do is we buy TVs, we buy cars, we buy stuff we can't afford. We extend our mortgage out 30 years, our car loan 74 years. We borrow against our future self. You should never be borrowing against your future self. You should always be preparing and compounding for your future self. I'll stop right there. Does that part make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. So, and I always tell them, like, guys are like, oh, like I love fast cars. Me and my son love cars. I will get a Lambo. But if you ever see me driving a Lambo, my Lambo will be a retirement policy. And people are like, how do you do that? So I'll explain. So basically, when I was broke on my parents' couch, I was like, man, I've made $250,000 as executive. I was broke. I made a ton of money through our little program, and then I went broke again. I went broke 3 times. Well, the reason why is because every time I got money, I bought things. I bought stuff that made the wealthier wealthier. So what I started to do is I started to take my money and I put my money where the wealthy put their money. Okay. When the public got excited about things like cryptocurrency, stock market, I exited. So when everybody was coming in, I pulled profits. I took those profits and I put my money where the wealthy put their money. I insured it, and they don't teach you how to insure they teach you how to insure your car, your house, but they insure their wealth. So I started insuring my wealth. Now, the reason why I did that is because you always want to put your money in something you can borrow against tax free. So when I want to buy an asset, I borrow against it tax free, because when you lend to yourself, that's the proper debt. When you lend to yourself, there's no taxes on that. But when you lend to yourself, you need to buy something else that generates income. So we started this process in 2020. And now we're like in this asset bubble, right? So basically, when crypto goes up, everybody's coming in. I exit. I put it into tier one capital. And then when I want to buy my Lambo next year, I'm actually going to buy it with an insurance policy. And so when I'm driving my Lambo, I'm actually compounding 2% on my money. And so the point behind this is, as a young man, is you'll get to the cool cars, you'll get to that stuff, but the younger you are. So my son is 8 years old. He's already going to retire with $1.7 million. The power. This is what I want. If anybody can take anything from this, time is on your side if you're young. The older you get, the less time you have to compound. The eighth wonder of the world is compound interest. So my son is 8. Okay. My daughter is going to be 20. They're both going to retire with the same amount of money, right? My daughter has to invest double what her 8-year-old brother has to do because of compound. So does that make sense? So compound is very important. Every 7 years, money compounds. So if I was a young man right now and I had like a lawn mowing route, what I would do is every time I got money is I would figure out how to multiply that money. When the money multiplies, I'd put it into something that multiplies. And then from there, that's when you buy your car. That's when you get your down payment for your house. And then if you do this at a really early age, a couple books you can read is Think and Grow Rich is a really, really, really good book. Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, which will change and frame your mind around money. One that's a little bit difficult to understand, but this is The Richest Man in Babylon. That's a concept I'm talking about right now. And then Robert Kiyosaki's The Cash Flow Quadrant. So, and then also too, like I was on a podcast recently and the guy was like, because I preach entrepreneurship, but
Yeah.
it's not, he brought up something that was really good. It made me think for a moment. Cause I'm always like, be an entrepreneur. Cause that's where I build my most wealth is from entrepreneurship. But he's like, not everybody can be an entrepreneur, which is true. They say 85% of small business fail, 15% succeed, 1% become 7-figure ecosystems. But what he said was powerful. He teaches people how to make money with a job, right? When you make more money, you don't buy more stuff. You take that money and you invest that money, and then you buy the stuff. Does that make sense?
100%, dude. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you breaking it down in that way. I think that's such a big piece in schools right now. I mean, there's the specific curriculum around, the history, the sciences, the math, but this is something that's really applicable. And it should be a part of what especially young men are learning right now in schools. or what you mentioned, like take that money and invest in yourself. So why not invest in a program
Yeah.
where even if you are a young man, invest in your future in that way. And if you start investing now, like you just mentioned, your son
Yeah.
who's 8 years old, if you're putting in a little bit of
Yeah.
money, the return on investment is astronomical, especially as he gets older. If he
Yeah.
continues to double up on his investments.
Cool.
Really, really
See,
powerful stuff. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say with parents too out there. When I talk to fathers and I'm like, start now for your kids. If it's too late for you, start for your kids. Like, so for example, when my son is 18, if he wants to buy a car, he borrows from his own policy. He doesn't have to go to a bank. My son will not have to go to a bank. My daughter will not have to go to a bank to get her down payment for her first house. If she wants to start a business, she'll actually go to her own. It's called infinity banking concept, and it's like we have to understand. We don't have to, but what I encourage people to do is study tax codes. So 401k is a tax code. Tax code 7702A was created in 1913 with the Federal Reserve. If you start studying tax code, the system's not designed against you. It's designed for you to be rich. You just have to understand where to put your money. Where if you put your money where the rich put their money, we borrow against our assets tax free, right? People put their money in a 401k and then they get taxed on the back end of their life. So we have to learn. So the game is not rigged. It's available to everybody, but we have to seek it. You have to understand it, right? If money is just debt, and money is fiat, which fiat means fake, then why would you want a bunch of fake money sitting in your bank account? Because they're taking your fake money and they're putting it into insurance. They're lending it to the next person and they're putting it in the capital markets. They're taking your money. So we teach people just to remove the third party, right? I use a bank, transact, pay my employees, pay my team members, pay, to buy groceries and stuff. But anything above my 6 months of bills is always invested in something that's going to bring me more income.
You should be teaching this in every single school in the country right now. Really, I mean, if
Yeah.
this information was out there, I mean, I think about myself as a young man, or even my son. I wish he had this information. This will be a podcast. I'm going to say, Dan, you have to listen to this one right away. Send it to all your friends as well, because this is such an important concept, dude. I really, really appreciate it. I want to respect your time, so I want to like ask you my final question. But before I
Yeah.
do, how do we find what you're doing with the 3T Warriors? How do we get your
Yeah.
books? Like, where do we find everything about what you're doing? This has been awesome, dude.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. So two ways you can do it is just type in Coach JV, like junior varsity, Coach JV on Google. All my content will come up. Or you can type in 3T warrioracademy.com and Google, and all our content will come up. Our YouTube, our Instagram, all those different things. And so we have a 16-page free book people can download with all the concepts I just talked about. I wrote a book about it. It's a free book that people can download, because it's like when you talk about this stuff contextually, it's like, oh, this is exciting, but then we get back into our busy day. But how do we apply that, right? And that's by design to get us to trade time for money, so much time we can't pay attention. So I'll repeat that. They get us trading so much time for money that we don't have time to pay attention. So I always tell young men, I say, be careful. What you're paying attention to is what you're paying for.
And the time is, it's a finite thing, right? And so be
Mm-hmm.
really, really conscious of how you're choosing to spend
Yes.
those minutes that you have. Final question, JV, is, I mean, first, the depth at which you got into those emotional stories, I wanted to acknowledge and just truly appreciate the vulnerability that you shared with the Building Men audience. Say, like, it does not go unnoticed. I really appreciate you diving deep with us. And then the learning that came along with it. I mean, I always think if you have a podcast where you could laugh a little bit, you learn a little bit, and you even shed a little bit of a tear during the course of an episode, an emotional roller coaster. I think it's a really valuable experience for the audience. So the last question I always ask is, somebody has a ton of value from this conversation already. They press pause, and there's one thing that they can do, and by doing this one thing, it could really change the trajectory of what's going on in their life. What's that one thing?
Is develop principles. That's what changed my life. I did it 2 years ago. I read a book called Principles by Ray Dalio. It's a red book that he talks about the importance of principles and how, because if you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. So when I develop principles, which for business is integrity, honesty, uncompromised belief, every decision I make goes through a principle model. Is it in integrity? Is it in honesty? And can I be in alignment with God, with these people in business? For my family, it's peace, freedom, and family structure. So every decision I make, if I'm out somewhere and I'm having a cocktail, I'm like, am I going to have this cocktail if I'm driving? Because that could disrupt my peace, my freedom, or my family structure. So I won't have that cocktail because it's out of alignment with who I am. So I would say to all young men and adults out there to develop principles because and embody those principles so that your kids can see those within you. And that's something that radically transformed my life. It drives every decision I make.
Powerful stuff, dude.
Thank you.
For the audience here, if you've got any level of value from this episode, please consider liking this, rating it, reviewing it, and more than anything, sharing this episode out with anyone that you think might resonate with Coach JV's message, his whole play, and what he's doing for the future, brother. Really, really appreciate it. And then I'll throw back a quote that you said early on, that what we need to hear a little bit more of is "I love you, brother." So I'm going to tell you that I love you, brother.
I love you
And
very much. Very much.
to the listeners, go one step further than you thought you could go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.